and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Business of Property. I'm your host, Cheryl Leong from Property Development Australia. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. At the Business of Property, we interview superstar guests in the property development space that share their expertise, deals, and stories to help empower, build, and grow our community of property developers. So hello there to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube land. Give me a shout out if you are here today in the comment section below. Before I introduce my guest today, I would like to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. And I really want to highlight the resonance of the theme from this year's International Women's Day, which is breaking the bias. And again, just really quickly before I introduce our guest, as a young girl, I wanted to be in the construction industry because my dad used to take us along. He was in construction. He used to take us along for meetings, you know, very OHS&S friendly. This was in Malaysia. And I really was so drawn and fascinated by him being part of this sort of building things and creating things. And there used to be lots of people on site, not a lot of machinery. This is sort of going back 30 odd years. But it just wasn't something that girls did. My brother ended up being a civil engineer. I did really well at design and technology, but again, you know, it wasn't something that girls did at the time. It took me a long time to realize as a young woman that it was okay to be part of the property space. And I'm so thankful for the women in property that have paved the way and are continuing to pave the way and break this gender bias about, you know, property and development being a real sort of alpha male industry, and it's so fantastic to see women and men doing incredible things in property development today. So I really want to celebrate everyone, women who are you know, my friends, my colleagues that are doing fantastic projects in property development and just in business and life. So thank you. And today, so diving straight in is my guest today, Adam, who is the Managing Director at Liberty Blue Wealth. Those of you who have been following my weekend sort of updates, I've been doing a course over the last few weeks, I think about 5 weeks now, and which Adam has put together. It's a property development course. So Adam specializes in educating property developers, but he is obviously no stranger to development itself. He has, over the last 10 years, grown from learning about property development to now doing subdivisions with 300 plus lots. So I thought I'd ask Adam to come and join us today on the Business of Property to share his journey, and I guess to highlight the things that developers need to be aware of from going from sort of smaller scale developments to large scale developments, because I don't think it's just a matter of going, whoo, it's just going to happen like that. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce to you and ask to the dance floor, Adam. Hello, how are you doing? Sorry, I hope you didn't sort of nod off to sleep in that very, very long introduction, Adam.
No, that was nice.
Oh, good.
I was thinking about all the women I knew or know in property, including my mum. So
yeah, fabulous. Good. Was she a developer or an investor? What does she do in property?
Yeah, a bit of both.
Yeah.
Not large scale, but got into property investing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I was sort of the sidekick. We'd go to open homes, and I read the same investment books that she did when I was a teenager. So I was lucky I did get a bit of a head start.
Yeah. And she was obviously like, you know, you looked up. She was a mentor in that sense, and it's wonderful. I think, you know, that there again, it's such a shift. I asked my daughter today, I'm like, did you know back in the day, women didn't have the opportunities to do the things that they wanted to do? And I was like, can you even imagine that? We're so lucky where we are living in Australia that our kids don't even, they can't even comprehend this whole idea that there was gender bias or discrimination or inequality. So again, I'm very glad to be on this platform here as equals, talking about the thing that we all enjoy, which is property development. So Adam, can you sort of give us a little bit of a short summary about your background, how you got started in property development?
Yes. Okay. The elevator pitch.
Yes.
I just finished university. My cousin told me about this property event that was on, and it was a free introductory seminar. It was run by a lady, actually. And I went along and she told me I could buy property with no money. And so I believed her, and I went out and bought a $3 million development using none of my own money. And that was 6 months after I went to this seminar. So that was how I got started. And I remember sitting in the audience or in this chair and thinking that I was going to be a property developer at some point in my life, like in my 40s, once I'd built up an asset base and generated enough normal properties to have enough cash to do it myself. And then she said, well, you don't need the cash. You just need to find a vendor, get the vendor to put up the cash.
Was that when it went?
Yeah. I was like, awesome. That sounds way better than working. So I think I was like 2 months out of uni, and I had a scholarship. So I worked for the civil construction company. I'm a civil engineer by profession. And I love civil engineering, hated working for somebody else, and I hated working Saturdays too. I was working, when I finished uni, 10 hours a day or probably longer, 11 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then we had to come in for Saturdays as well. So when you're 22, you're working like 50, 60 hours a week, it sucked. So I was like,
you meant to be out clubbing.
Sorry?
You meant to be out clubbing at 22, and well, there are not many young, sort of 22-year-olds that are thinking about property development as well. So it's great that you had that particular mindset to even sort of explore that and think about retirement in some sense.
I was just thinking about, she told me I could make 100 grand in like 6 months. So I was like, all right, 6-month goal, make 100 grand and quit work.
And so what actually happened? What was, can you tell us some high level details of the deal that you put together and how you put that together?
Yeah, so it took a little bit longer than 6 months. I had a bit of a learning curve to go on first. Actually, one thing I want to mention is I never told anyone other than probably my mum and my cousin about what I had planned to do. So I enrolled in this lady's course, and the course back then was $6,500. This is in 2010, $6,500. I put it on the credit card because I was making like $60,000 a year, which is not too bad as an engineer. But so yeah, put it on the credit card, paid off the credit card. And it astonishes me how many people don't want to pay for their education and are happy just to give it a go and see how things end up. And it costs them a lot more than the price of like, a cheap course. So yeah, how I went on from there, I found the deal. I got the vendor to finance it. I did a vendor finance deal, which was 5 houses and townhouses in Morningside, suburb called Morningside, 5 kilometres east of Brisbane CBD. And then I found another investor to come up with basically the balance money to finalise or complete the development. And then fast forward 2 and a bit years later, that was finished. Made some money, sold just before that 2013 boom, or when we had that mini boom in Brisbane. So I did realise even back then, if I had have sold sort of 6-12 months later, I would have made another $500,000, but live and learn.
So
and then a few years later, I ended up quitting my job full time.
And that's, I look at that and I go, well, there are a few things here, because it's a lot, a lot of people go, I've just started, first of all, you were fairly young. It's your first deal. And that's not a small deal. It's not a 1 into 2 subdivision sort of thing. How were you able to get the vendor and an investor to be able to buy into your vision for your very first deal?
Yeah, I think mindset comes into it a lot. I know when you were on the course, you wanted more on mindset.
Yeah.
I think mostly just thinking that it's possible is half the battle. Most people, when they hear about these no money down strategies or you don't need a lot of money, they're all like naysayers, like, no, it can't be done. Or they go and talk to somebody else and they say it can't be done. So I never really had any of that starting out because I didn't bother to talk to anyone else about it. I just said, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing property development. They were kind of like, okay, cool. And so I just had unwavering belief that I would find a vendor to finance the deal. So all the sites I was looking at, which ranged, and that site, the purchase price was 1.1 million. So I was looking at sites anywhere from sort of 500,000 up to about 5 million, probably more. So it didn't really matter about the price because the vendor was going to finance it. I didn't need to finance it. So that was the whole
itself, Adam. And I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I don't. You probably don't realize, like, because you've gone through it and it's sort of history, but this is such a critical point. So many people that are in our community, first of all, they're thinking I know I've got to have serviceability for my first project and so on and so forth. Had you bought any properties prior to that, like your own property? No, this is your very first property. Yeah. It was a not only a subdivision, it's a fairly large project. I mean, for a first project. Yeah. And to have, like, how did you approach the vendor? And then to have that unwavering belief obviously comes across as confidence in what you're achieving. Mm-hmm. How did you approach the vendor, and how did you, again, have them buy into the fact that this is a young guy, I don't even know if he knows what he's doing?
Yeah, that's true. That is a good point. That thought never really crossed my mind, actually, until after I finished it, after I finished the deal. I actually annoyed the agent enough that she introduced me to the vendor. And she just thought, oh, this guy's young and I've never introduced a vendor to a buyer. So she thought, oh, let's just give it a go. Yeah. I still keep in contact with her to this day, actually. And same with the vendor. I actually became friends with him through the development. So it ended up working out really well. So yeah, I went to the vendor, and when I met him, I ended up doing what I actually teach my students not to do. I did all of this work on the project and I had a folder about this thick that I went to the first meeting with. Normally I would advise people not to do all that work and actually go and suss the vendor out first and work out whether or not they're realistic or whether there's a deal to be done. So I did it the opposite, and it didn't really matter because I'd done this on numerous projects where I basically printed a whole folder, and courtesy of my employer at the time, I used their photocopier at all hours of the night. I'm sure they got their value out of me more than me just printing and using a couple of folders. But yeah, I went to him in the first meeting, and I kind of didn't really have that training to sort of suss out whether or not they'd even do a vendor finance deal. It was only that, hey, I got this idea. So it was kind of like, I just said to him, hey, this is all the research I've done here, plonked this massive folder on the table. And I said, he wanted, I think 1.3 million for his site at the time. I said, you want 1.3? It's not feasible at that. It's feasible at, I don't know, 800, 900. So I said, I'll give you 900 in cash, or we can do a deal where I pay you half now and then half at the end. And then so his ears pricked up.
And then he gets the full 1.3. Was that the
No, I ended up giving him 1.1 and then a share of the profits. Yeah. Yeah. So so that was the deal that we eventually struck. So after that first meeting, I kind of had skipped past the first meeting into like the second meeting. Normally have the initial meeting, you suss out whether the vendor was actually realistic and whether there's a deal to be had, and then you come back with like a folder full of stuff. So I kind of bypassed that because I didn't know. And then, he goes, okay, this is interesting. Let's have another meeting. And then that turned into, I don't know, half a dozen meetings. And it wasn't until we actually, as part of the development, we actually opened up a joint bank account with the vendor where he was basically a silent partner in the back. So he vendor financed it. And then as security, he sat as a silent partner in the background. So he could see basically the account. So it was funny when we set up one of the project accounts together, we had to disclose our birth year. So he says his birth year, and I think he was 76, born in 76. Well, we're in front of the banker, and when I disclosed my birth year, he jumped up. The deal had already been done at that point. He like shot up out of his chair and he's like, "What the hell?" He's like, "You're only 20. Was it 22? Yeah, I don't think I've had my 23rd birthday by the time we actually had opened that bank account for the project."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he kind of took him by surprise and he's like, "Shit, I thought you were 30. So obviously it came back to, I didn't look 30.
Yeah. Are you sure?
I think it's more about how you hold yourself and the confidence and having that belief. If I didn't have the belief that he was going to fund it, well, then he would have sensed that. It all comes back to like the vibration you give out to other people. Yeah. So he would have sensed that this guy has no idea what he's talking about or he's not confident. So, I mean, I just acted confidently because the person I got told that I could do this deal from, she was so adamant that this could be done that I had nothing else not to believe her. Like I had no other evidence to not believe her. So yeah, that was basically how I did the deal. A few half a dozen meetings later, and deal was done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so from that, and then you got an investor, I guess, similar sort of notion where you're confident with your numbers. You've obviously, fairly detailed, coming from an engineering background, and a folder of like this sort of due diligence sort of stuff. And so the vendor could see that you weren't sort of just pulling stuff from the air or the behind, that there was a level of due diligence that you've done. And the same thing for your investor. Like, was your investor someone that already knew you, and did they know that sort of, what was it that made them sort of agree to back you?
No, so I did a full proposal, same, I suppose, a bit more detailed or just a bit more of a formal proposal. I mean, I'd never done any of this before, so I kind of just, thought, well, what's an investor going to know? And I put it into a Word document. And looking back, it was actually pretty terrible. But yeah, I met people at various property meetups and just was really asking people whether or not they'd want to fund a deal. And so I contacted a few people and followed them up, and that was that. People that were looking for deals to do themselves, as in property development deals, and just went off the back of really the meetups and face-to-face building rapport with people, which is even what I continued to do after that as well. Yeah, and build good relationships with good people.
And were they purely money partners, or were they part of the sort of the project management of the deal as well?
No, definitely not part of the project management. The vendor, although he was in the company and he did play a little bit of an active role, I soon kicked him out in the nicest way possible. As in, there can only really be one person that's driving it. And he also worked away, as in the vendor worked away, which was actually good because then he kind of left me alone to just complete it. So, no, the partnership worked really well. He put up the money, I did all the work, and he got paid.
Well, he got more than he really would have otherwise sold it for.
Yeah.
Effectively.
If we had sold it 6 to 12 months later, we both would have made a whole lot more money. But
hindsight. So how have you gone? I mean, again, 10 years has passed, and you're doing much bigger deals now, Adam. Tell us about the largest deal that you have or have done or have in progress at the moment.
I suppose there's multiple reasonably sized deals. There's a mixture of commercial and resi. There's a 300 lot sub I'm working on, and then there's another 300 lot land sub plus commercial. And then there's another larger one that hopefully will come off as well, which will end up being by itself probably about 250 million in end value, depending on what council will support. So I expect that will be in the order of 500 dwellings plus various commercial and probably some community centre use. So it's a large infill site.
Yeah, and so that's a small suburb on itself.
It's kind of a tack on of another suburb. Yeah. So yeah, they're the types of deals I'm chasing. The 300 lot is in play. That bigger one isn't, as in I'm competing with kind of like the publicly listed companies in Australia for that one. But yeah, how I really went from doing smaller stuff, because after that development, I actually got another mentor, and my other mentor was doing smaller deals like splitters and threes. And so the advice he gave me, which in looking back was actually really terrible advice, was actually to go and do smaller deals. So I did the 5 initially, and then I went and did smaller deals, which was single house renovations. And I did about 10 of those over a 2-year period thereafter. And I should have and I was still working full time. What I really should have done was actually just go and do a bigger deal, or do that same size deal again in the same pocket. So I went and did those smaller ones, and then I thought, all right, I've had enough of doing these small, crappy deals. Sorry, they weren't crap. I shouldn't say they were crappy. I just wanted to get out and do like bigger deals again. And then I bought a 7-lot land subdivision and then a 10-house development in Brisbane, sort of at the back end of those smaller deals finishing. And so they were kind of the start of the bigger deals. And then I met another mentor who I actually employed pretty much full time. I paid him a huge amount of money to basically be in my corner. He was between things when I met him. He'd been a really large property developer out of Melbourne, had developed in the order of today's value, something like 500-600 million of mostly inner city apartment and townhouse type developments. So he pretty much took me to the next level from doing these 7, or the smaller land subs, the 2s, 3s, and then I had the 7 and the 10. And then what we did was actually develop a commercial strategy, which are those commercial deals I'm doing now. So I'm at the back end of those at the moment, as in at the back end completing. So in the next 12 months to 24 months, that pipeline of projects, that couple $100 million I expect will be completed, as long as people build stuff on time and it doesn't rain. So yeah, that pipeline's coming out in the next couple of years. So yeah, he was really the one that took me to the next level, mostly with, it was all about belief really, because he'd already done it and he kind of gave me the blueprint on how to do it. He had a couple of hiccups along the way, lessons that he learned from doing developments and going and doing big developments. So as much as I had him as a mentor, I really learned what not to do, or how not to screw it up, I should say. So yeah, we got into the bigger developments. I developed a commercial strategy with some guys out of Melbourne. And one of the particular guys had spent 25 years in fuel and fast food. So that's a lot of our commercial deals. And then went and pinpointed particular sites to then go and put these commercial uses on. And then in a roundabout way, started getting into land subdivisions as these commercial developments were sort of taking or going into fruition. The land development sort of just came off the back of that. I suppose our joint use, integrate the commercial with the land development and then chase the bigger projects. So rather than just doing a $20 or $25 million commercial precinct, I thought I could add on resi on the back of that and deliver the resi quickly, and then roll through the commercial, because the commercial projects have taken longer than anticipated. All of them got held up in planning, and it's required fairly deep pockets to get them out the other side. They're extremely profitable, but the timing blew out or has blown out, and the amount of money needed just to get it over that hump has also blown out as well, because council have just given us a hard time around commercial. So I suppose the jump from smaller to bigger was more about mindset. I went and raised a whole lot of capital to be able to do it in various different structures. And as a result of that, I've found some really good guys that just happen to have a lot of money and are property developers, and they're my biggest backers at the moment. And then I've got a lot of guys that have been with me for quite a while as well.
And so apart from it, the mindset, we talk about this in this community a lot, like the mindset side of things. It's like I said, the belief, the confidence, and just sort of the pure, pure blind faith to a certain extent in what you're able to achieve. That's the one thing. But then let's talk about sort of the not so much the logistical, but obviously when you're working on smaller developments, so you can pretty much run it by yourself. Like, what sort of a team do you really need to grow and actually hire to be dealing with these sorts of larger deals?
Yeah, that's a funny question. We actually had a team of 25 people in-house at one point, all on the books, payroll tax, massive fortnightly pay run, because the 25 people were architects, engineers, project managers, sales and marketing. They were all, most of them were highly paid six-figure guys. So we had a huge payroll. So yeah, that's actually how I scaled up. But after talking to many different people that are a lot older than me, they normally went through the same learning phase as me. They scale up with all this staff, and then they realize that all these staff actually don't do that much and they're not that efficient. And so they end up getting rid of them, and then they end up having a really small core team with really low overhead. So unfortunately, I went through the same learning phase. We ramped up. We actually had a pipeline of $1 billion lined up to purchase. And if it wasn't for a couple of business partner divorces along the way, we were on track to hit that target by about this year, actually, as in have $1 billion of projects in the pipeline, which is a pretty crazy, now that I look back, I mean, it's very, I shouldn't say crazy, very ambitious feat, and we would have hit it. And now look what the market's done. That $1 billion would have been extremely profitable.
Yeah.
I was just with the wrong people. And so that sort of set me back a little bit. So I had business partners, and then ended up parting ways with those business partners. And there were a couple in the business. But yeah, scaled up, had a huge amount of staff, had another separate company, which was a public unlisted company to raise capital. So it was completely at arm's length. And that company was we had a $50 million prospectus, which was ultimately seed funding. And part of that was to fund our developments. And then the other part was as a lending company. So we couldn't lend the entire 100% to ourselves.
Yes.
But that was where we were anticipating to basically cash flow this $1 billion pipeline. We just, hit a few hiccups along the way. And most of that was to do with values of business partners. I just didn't agree with some of the principles that they were carrying out. And so, ended up keeping a very small core team and having some guys that were full-time employees end up putting them on contract. So we got out of the payroll tax because all of the guys went on contract. And then I ended up taking over management on all of our projects at one point, just because I had guys in-house that were running them, and they weren't being run as efficiently as what I wanted them. And so, I suppose the team that I had, some of them were the right team and a lot of them weren't. So very expensive and time-consuming learning lesson. But when you go up into the bigger developments, you do need to rely on external teams. And I would say, looking back, and now what I do is contract people for certain projects, so that if they don't perform, I can just get rid of them straight away. When you've got staff, you've got to manage them out of the business. Yeah.
So has there been a time where you sort of you sort of said to yourself, I should have stuck to smaller deals? And when I say smaller deals, sort of that 5 to 10 townhouse type, small to mid-size. I guess when you had 25 people and you were paying a few $1 million in payroll, maybe that was, you said that. And so is it now, like what's the long-term forecast of what your business is going to look like and the types of developments you're looking to acquire?
Yeah, so I'm just focused on land subdivisions at the moment, have been for a little while, the last 12 to 18 months. The business will look like, or does look like, me being active at the start of the project and getting it through to the approval phase. And then once it's at the approval phase, then handing it off to a construction team. And I still have my finger on the pulse. I spend a lot less time capital raising because I've built up momentum with investors as a result of the capital raise or the raises that we did 4 years ago, and projects that are coming through the pipeline through to completion where investors are being paid off. There's some momentum there with repeat investors and investors going from some of them from like $1 million funding up to like 3-4 million and so on. Some of them not as substantial, but yeah, there's some substantial guys that has taken a little while to build their trust. But now obviously I've got their trust that they have quite substantial amounts of money. So I like just the other day, I made a phone call to one of my investors and I said, I can go to market and raise capital for this project, or do you want to do it? Do you want to extend the facility? And on the 3-minute phone call, he said, sure, no worries. I'm like, cool, I'll do the paperwork. And that was that. So I am lucky I do have those relationships, but it has taken time to build up that trust with people, and them know that I know that I can make them return. So yeah, I suppose model moving forward is to keep it lean. I've met some fairly substantial developers that have almost no staff. I met a guy, I was lucky enough to meet a friend of my mentors out of Melbourne that was a billionaire. I don't know how he's not listed on the BRW list. He keeps it under the radar somehow. He's got 7 staff in probably a 400 square meter office in the center of Melbourne. He runs 7 staff and they manage a multi-billion-dollar property portfolio. So obviously his staff are quite good. I have read an article before, I think it was a Bloomberg article, that 80% of the work, 20% of the work gets done by the square root of the number of employees. 80% of the work, that's right, gets done by the square root of the number of employees. So as you get bigger, there's all this inefficiency that happens. And so the guys like Stockland and Lendlease, if you did the raw numbers on some of their deals, like the raw feasibilities, their profit margins are huge. But when you look at their financials, they might only be making 10% a year or 10% return, because they've got such huge overheads and they've got such inefficiencies. They've got various lines of management, and I'm sure they're paying their managers $200,000-$400,000 a year or more, plus bonuses. So a lot of that gets eaten up. Whereas you look at guys like the guy that's doing Springfield, I always forget how to pronounce his name, but the guy that's doing Springfield out of Brisbane, he does one development over 30 years and he's a billionaire from that one development. Yeah. So there's a lot of margin in those master plan communities. He fought with council for I don't know how long, 15 years, and state and lobbied and had all the political influence and all that stuff. So
yeah. And so what would you say are the top three tips that you have for developers who are looking to go from, all right, I've done the small scale subdivisions, I'm doing sort of townhouses, I'm sort of looking into whether, because the bigger developments, obviously, they're spread across, if you're looking at 3, maybe 5 years, right? That's fairly reasonable time frame, even longer.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. How do you feed yourself between paydays to start with, and then second, what are the considerations that you need to make to sort of go, all right, I'm ready to go from here, where a project might be done within 18 months, 2 years maximum, to something that's going to be much longer.
Yeah. I did realize a few years ago why people don't do bigger developments, because it does add a level of complexity to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the payoff is great, don't get me wrong. It's just about stepping up. And like you said, there's 3 to 5 years potentially, sometimes longer with the bigger projects. So you want to make sure that it's worth it and there's a lot of margin built in. And you also want to know that if, 3 to 5 year timeline blows out even further, that there's something like there's another project that is going to do okay as well. You don't want to be waiting 3 to 5 years and you've chewed up all of your or half your profit or all of your profit in holding costs over that time frame, which once you start getting into bigger deals, finance changes, as does council putting their hand out for money, because when you start doing bigger deals, you start upgrading infrastructure, your costs get bigger, then you start looking at like bonding works to get stuff on maintenance. So yeah, there's a lot more to consider when you're doing bigger deals. I always tell my guys, if you're looking at doing smaller deals, keep under like the 3 or 4, because your financing is generally a lot easier. You don't need pre-sales. And generally under 3 or 4, you don't need to upgrade any infrastructure. Once you start getting over that 3 or 4, at least for Southeast Queensland, as soon as you're at 4 or 5 lots, you need to do like a network analysis on sewer, water, electrical. So if you're doing like 5 lots and you got to upgrade a substation, and that's 50 grand, that could be half your profit, or it could be a quarter of your profit just in that one upgrade. Or if you've got to upgrade a sewer manhole or whatever it is. So I would say if you're comfortable doing the small ones and you've had some wins with doing small ones, I don't think there's any problem doing small deals and making money, and maybe just having multiple small deals on the go. With stepping up into the bigger deals, I honestly don't think it's worth doing anything less than like 15 at a time. There's guys that will do a little bit less than that, like 5 or 10, but there's just so many inefficiencies. Once you start getting into that 5 plus, you're in the like network analysis, then your financing becomes more expensive. So you go out of the resi finance into, or you go out of like the resi / small commercial into like the bigger commercial. And at the moment, unless you've already got existing banking relationships or you've got existing commercial property with a nice fat line of credit, you've got to go into like a second tier or a private, unless you want to wait around for the banks for 6 or 9 months to get finance approved. So you're into like 7 to 10% interest rates, or 6 to 10% interest rates plus pre-sales. And then you've obviously got the time consideration. So you want to know that this bigger deal is going to have like 30, 40, 50% margin. And it can absorb those extra costs. And then, with our deals, with my deals, I've got investors in the back end as well. So I've got to know that there's enough profit for this higher interest rate, because I'm not a banking client, because I'd be waiting forever to get some of these deals across with the bank. And then that there's enough margin to pay out investors, and that there's enough in it to make the whole deal worthwhile. So I can't compete with somebody who's got cash that they're doing a development at, and their finance costs are 2 or 3%. I've got one of my biggest investors. He's got a massive pool of cash, which is a line of credit over his commercial portfolio. And he does developments. He's doing he just did 30 units. He's about to start on 100 units, but he's getting his money at 2 or 2.5%, basically off the back of his line of credit. He doesn't need any pre-sales on any of his developments, and he's just basically building it in cash, essentially, because the banks don't ask him questions when he redraws a line of credit. They don't want to know what it's for. He just redraws it and he pays it in cash. So very different when you're trying to compete with somebody like that. If you need to finance it. Unless you've got a line of credit that's 30 million deep, or if you're doing smaller stuff, it doesn't need to be that big. But unless you've got deep pockets and it's your own money, or you can access it at 2%, you need to take the finance costs into consideration. In the overall deal. And then obviously if the time delays, which it can do with some of the planning, it's always the planning that delays. Once you get the planning, the rest of it's easy in my mind. It's the planning that takes or can take the time with the bigger one. So you want to make sure it's worth it at the end, and that all your costs are absorbed. So I would say, just to sum up and answer that question, I would say there's nothing wrong with doing smaller deals. If you are going to jump into a bigger deal, just know what you're jumping into and allow enough buffer for it, and make sure that it's going to be worthwhile at the end. And I would say for efficiencies, do something that's like, at least 15, whatever that 15 is, because then you start to get efficiencies with pre-sales, lending. It's all the same amount of effort. Normally the same amount of cost. Like your marketing, setup, financing.
That's a good point. I think that's a bit of a nugget there in terms of what's a sweet spot. And I picked something up from there to sort of go, if you're going to go to larger developments, and I say larger, you might as well go into that 15 plus instead of keeping it in that awkward phase of between 5 to 15. That's a really good point there. So Adam, I'm conscious there we've got a few minutes to go. I do want to talk a little bit about your recent course that you've launched, and I've been a part of that, and I've learnt a lot. Even though I've been in development for a little while, I'm a constant learner. Tell us a little bit about what sort of the motivation was behind putting a course together, and I guess tell us a little bit about how that format is going to be rolled out.
Yeah, okay. So the motivation kind of started about 5 or 6 years ago when I wrote a course with one of my mentors. And we actually did a launch night or launch day and all of that stuff. And then I never ended up rolling it out because I got too busy developing properties. Since then, and even prior to that, I get a lot of people ask me like different advice and things. Not that I give advice, but I give my opinion on things. And it just got to a point where I was giving out all this advice and I couldn't actually help all my opinion, not advice. And I couldn't actually help the person or the people enough. Like I was kind of like, I need you to do like a program so you can just solve it on your own and you don't have to rely on me. Like I'd given people like a couple of like things that they should do, just, helping out investors, friends, family. And I have been meaning to launch a course for quite some time. I actually had a course completely written 5 or 6 years ago. I ended up starting again about 18 months ago, and basically reformatted the whole thing. And that's the course that I'm delivering now at the moment. So really it's just to give people empowerment to either do it themselves, or at least if they do want to do it themselves, it's enough knowledge that they can. I don't hold back on anything. There's no other program that I offer. I don't have time to offer another program. So this is the one and only. And then I do provide group coaching as well. So I do want people to succeed. And then off the back of that, as well, I expect people will do their own developments and maybe they'll end up investing with us sometime in the future. Or what I'm thinking as a long-term vision is some of these guys that I end up training, I'll probably end up investing with them myself in the future. I can't possibly be doing every development in Australia. There's only so many projects you can do at any one time and do them well. So I just have a plan to have, 6 to 10 big projects on the go at any one time. And after that, with surplus cash, probably invest in other people. So hopefully there's a win-win for everyone, but really it's really just to empower people to do it themselves, because a lot of people either want to do it themselves or think they want to do it themselves. And give them my experience and my system to do it.
Yeah, fabulous. And I've been through the last few weeks. Admittedly, we went away on week 2. We've listened to, I've listened to the recordings and also the resources. There are some really, really good resources there. I know there's feasibility, there's some templates. Your checklist is like this long, which I really love. I'm a big I like to tick things off. So it's really handy from that point. But then there's also the live coaching sessions that you're doing, which are, people are presenting their deals in the forum, and you're being able to sort of give feedback and recommendations, like you said, which I think is really helpful, because one of the things that I find a lot of developers struggle with is once they've got the learning, they sort of go, well, I don't know if I'm actually applying it correctly. And actually going, well, is this a deal that stacks up? Is this a deal that, financially makes sense? What are the things I'm missing from that? And you've been able to sort of provide that feedback to the group in that aspect. So for those of you that are listening, and I know a lot of people sort of reach out in the community to ask about education. First of all, obviously you've gone through the education path. I've been through the education path. You've paid for it. I've paid for it as well, and are constantly learning. Like, I would say, number one, definitely invest in your education. Like, if you've paid, if you're someone who has gone through university, right, and then probably come out of university thinking, actually, I didn't really enjoy that much. I'm going to be a developer. Look at development and education in a similar way, because it's actually teaching you how to grow your wealth, as opposed to teaching you to necessarily work for someone. But the other thing as well that I want to say was, it doesn't matter who you're learning from. Not that it doesn't matter. Like, you've obviously had different mentors and educators. You're always going to learn something from somewhere, right? Whether it's a strategy, whether it's just something new that you haven't heard before. Everyone's going to have their own flavor. And so again, it's around, don't be afraid to be continuously learning from different people and taking different courses. So that's my sort of, my feedback and my comments. It's been set up really well. I'm not saying this just because you're here.
I know you've told me some things you don't like in it. So
yeah, what was it that I don't like?
I know you're honest.
Yeah, I can share my sort of feedback. It's because I can see the value that it brings, and the fact that definitely you're sharing a lot. We're going through these live sessions with you on a Saturday morning. Good excuse for my kids to watch the iPad for I don't know how long. But you're trying, you're squeezing in a lot into that, and I'm definitely seeing that there's so much to take out of that. And again, if you ever sort of get lost, there's sort of the recordings, and then there's sort of training and assessments and resources as well, which I think are very, very helpful for anyone that sort of spends the time and has the mindset that it's possible. Again, if you're in, whoever's listening, the intention is to go from I want to be a developer to I'm going to do, multi-million-dollar developments in the next few years. You can see someone's done it. Someone's here, and the whole idea about the business of property is to be able to share people's journey, like your journey, and appreciate you sharing about, the ups and the downs and the learnings. I'm sure that's a really high summary of it. But learn and allow yourself to be, to educate and be surrounded by people who are going to support you to get to that point. So again, was sort of my very, very quick sort of, feedback.
Can I add to that as well?
Yeah.
So I mentioned when I was 22, I paid $6,500 for this course. 6 months later, I actually did another course. It was $6,500 or $6,000. And then 6 months after that, I did another course, and it was $6,000. And then I paid a mentor. I think it was $14,000. So if you add all that up, what's that, like over 30,000? I think it was like 32 or 33,000 over a period of about 18 months. So I was, probably 24, and I'd spent 35 grand or give or take on courses and mentors and education when
Yeah.
I was still making, like, I think my wage was up at like 80 at that point. So I'd spent a significant amount of my savings, probably the majority of it, on all of these programs because I valued education. I thought my university course was 40 grand, which I was lucky enough to have a scholarship. So I thought I didn't pay for my university, so I'll pay for this education. So that was how I thought about it. And then, after that, I paid ongoing mentor fees. And then when I actually had my large mentor, I paid him $5,000 a month, I think, to start. Then it went to 10,000, and then it went to 20,000, and then it went to 30,000. This is a month for him to mentor me. So I don't know what that adds up to. Probably $1 million, maybe. So I do highly value education, because if you can get in the same room as other people and pick their brains, and they give you the secrets, then you can just replicate that. So I thought it was money well invested. And I am really amazed people won't part with, like, guys that have multiple properties in their portfolio. They've already done okay. They won't even part with whatever it is, $5,000 or $10,000 on a program. Even if you got one thing out of that program, you're talking about property where the average median price of a property in Sydney is over $1 million. So, you're talking about a program that's less than 1% of the price of a property. You bid. Yes. I just think when I was at an auction the other day on this house we were looking at, and people were bidding in $100,000 increments on this house. And I'm like, do you guys even know what this house is worth? Like, they're just like, here's my placard, 100,000, 100,000.
Yeah, it's not painful. I'm just doing this. I'll feel it. I get the buyer's remorse when I have to sign off on the bank loan. Yeah.
Yeah, well, people get emotional in that state. They're buying a property. It might be their place to live in or whatever it is. But at the end of it, if the market goes down or they've overpaid for it, they can use the excuse of, property's a long-term journey, whatever. But they might have just locked themselves into their job for another 25 years if they've bought over the market, if they're in a job. So, you're trying to exit a job. You might have a property portfolio, but if you get one or two bad buys in that could really set you back potentially for 5 or 10 years or longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Adam, I'd love if you can share some details about if anyone wants to find out a bit more about what you're doing, a bit more about. I know that you've got a free training as well, and there's actually some real good things in that free training. Even as an investor, that's the one thing that I recall that you were talking about is, and breaking it down, like, if you're an investor, like, you still need to educate yourself.
Yeah.
If you're going to invest in development, you need to understand and be able to do your due diligence and understand what you're investing in. And that was the part I really enjoyed, how you broke it down to go, all right, if you're invested, this is what you need to know. If you're a developer, and sort of broke it down as to, this is the minimum amount of education that you need so that you can invest with confidence and ask the questions and do it. So it's not just sort of, you're not playing the pokies sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It is amazing how many people buy a development site that they're sitting on, or they think they're land banking, and half the development site is flood affected, or they haven't realized that half there's a road upgrade and it runs straight through their house, or the council zoned it as parkland or something like that. And someone's thinking they're land banking and it's going to be worth all this money when it all gets rezoned. But you can do it once and people might fluke it or whatever and get wealthy off, just having the right property in a growth area or whatever it is when it gets rezoned. But to do it continuously, you've actually got to know what you're doing, which I know, Cheryl, you've looked at buying for big companies as well. You can see it a mile away when you know what to look for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've got one of my favorite was, not favorite, but at the time it did sort of show, like, if you've got one, the right connections, and two, you understand the planning. There was a 90-acre site that we were looking to purchase, and they were wanting at least $1 million an acre. But we knew that the developer that had purchased around them were a bit cheeky, because they couldn't purchase this land that was in between. And so they did a whole master plan across the whole thing, and they made half their lot a school.
Yeah.
Meant like the other half was residential. Well, actually, there was a quarter that was, I think it was open space, and then there was just like a quarter that could be developed. So, you know, the value of that land had reduced dramatically from the mere fact that, and there were developers that were offering that full amount, but they had no idea that this planning was going in place, and this master plan sort of proposal had gone in by the developer that was around them. So again, you know, your networks, knowing what to look out for. The other thing that there was mind subsidence in this as well. Again, knowing to look out for these sorts of things. And it's a whole part of educating. You can either do it the slow way of having to trial and error, which is a bit painful and expensive, or you can accelerate that by getting educated, getting mentored, and just going out and believing that, you know, believe that you can do it and actually take action.
Yeah, and take the right action. Don't just be there spinning your wheels.
Not any action. So where can people find out a bit more about your course, what it is that that's involved, and so on? I believe we might have a link somewhere.
Do you want to put a link later? But if they go to the website 𝐷𝐵𝐴𝐼.com.au, so 𝐷𝐵𝐴𝐼 Blue is the training company. You'll just have to type it in the URL direct. The SEO, because it is fairly new, I don't think the SEO is quite kicked in yet. So 𝐷𝐵𝐴𝐼.com.au is the course, the training platform, and then the development company is AdPen.
Sure.
So if anyone wants to look up the development company, but if you look up Liberty Blue, it's linked back to AdPen.
Awesome. Thank you.
So
thanks, Adam.
Want to see more info?
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I think you probably want to go to bed.
Well, I've actually got a meeting.
Oh, wow, another one.
There's another one. The day is still young. The day is still young. But life, that's such is life. But I enjoy what we do, and so do you. So appreciate your time. I'll see you on the weekend. I'm not really sure how many weeks we've got left. Is this the last one?
This is actually week 6, but we're actually running overtime. So it'll end up lapsing into week 7 for the first.
Oh, there we go. We still get more of Adam. Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate your time and sharing your journey with us. Everyone that's listened in, if you enjoyed our session today, please put a comment in below. If you've still got questions for Adam, please reach out to him as well. And we'll see you on the next session of The Business of Property. Make sure you visit and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Cheryl Leong, where you can find all our past Business of Property videos. And you found value in the show, appreciate if you could subscribe and chuck in a big thumbs up and like. So stay safe and well, everyone. I hope you are dry, and I hope as well that all this rain dries up very, very soon. Prayers and wishes to everyone that's been affected by all these floods. Please reach out to the community as well, Property Development Australia, if you do need some support in whatever manner that might be. So take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.